Hi, I'm Hedrick Ellis, and I'm a senior instructional technologist at Endicott College. Welcome to Implementing Virtual Reality Across the Curriculum. Thanks for checking out my presentation. I want to share with you my experience introducing VR to the faculty here at Endicott, and then helping them to implement VR in a variety of ways across the curriculum. So here's a quick look at my agenda. So first I want to talk a little bit about evangelizing for VR. So even if you're excited about this new technology, it doesn't necessarily mean it will take off right away. There are some strategies for how to get different members of your faculty interested in trying out the technology. So I'll go over that. And then I'll just look at an overall framework for different categories of VR or different types of VR that might be helpful as you think about what parts of the curriculum might be positively impacted by this technology. And then I'm going to look at 5 specific examples here at Endicott where faculty and students are actively using VR for teaching and learning. And then I'm going to give a pretty basic technical overview. I'm not going to go into much detail, but just giving you an idea of what kind of hardware and software we used and some of the lessons that we've learned along the way. And then finally, share a vision for the future of XR. And XR is this blanket or umbrella term for extended reality. So it's VR, AR, augmented reality, and mixed reality. So some of the things that we're thinking of doing in the future I can share with you, and some things that in the marketplace in general that I'm excited about. So this idea of evangelizing reminded me of this book where I first heard this term in terms of technology. It's a great book. This guy Kawasaki was the first head of marketing at Apple when they introduced the Macintosh. And so he wrote this whole book about evangelizing. And, the basic idea is it's trying to convince people to believe in your product as much as you do, selling your dream with passion, dedication, guts, and cunning. So it's, even though the word evangelism, I first learned of it in the context of religion, this has now become sort of an approach to not only business, but I think a lot of, at the higher ed level or lots of different walks of life, the idea of evangelizing is important to help get people on board. So in my personal experience, here are some steps that I took. So we at Endicott have this thing called a community meeting about once a month. And you have to get on the agenda, which I did. And it certainly wasn't just me alone. I got lots of help from my colleagues in academic technology. So we got like a 10 or 15-minute slot. We rehearsed, and we got a volunteer to actually just try VR and then project that on a big screen. And it went really well, and afterwards a lot of people came up to me who probably had never thought about VR and wanted to learn more. So that was a great way to kickstart some awareness of the technology. So then I started to go into individual faculty meetings. So this was a meeting of some of our nursing faculty, and they were able to try out the VR headset. And if they weren't trying it on, they could see on the monitor what the person was experiencing. And this reminds me of this quote. Talking about virtual reality is like dancing about architecture. In other words, you can only talk about it so much. People have to experience it. And so my big recommendation is just get people in the headset as soon as you can, because all the talk about it really is meaningless. The first time people put on the headset and experience it, there's a wow factor that is really kind of, almost life-changing. It's like, oh my God, I couldn't imagine what this could be like. So that was one of my goals, is get as many people in the headset. And then I started to go to some individual classrooms. Here's my colleague Elvis, who helped me out a lot. He's very tech savvy in terms of he's a gamer, so he knows all the different hardware tricks. This is a communications class that you'll see later in the presentation. They just Some of them were using VR for the first time. Another thing about classroom visits, I went into a classroom in another communication class, which was about social media, and I went into a sports science class. And faculty are happy to have guest visitors. Yeah, think about it. When you were faculty, or if you've ever taught, gee, that's less of preparation I have to do that day. I'll have somebody teach half my class. That's great. And it's also a change of pace for the students trying out something new. So I went around to these classrooms. Now, one of the challenges, as you can see from this, there's a tall kind of light stand sticking up there. There's various parts of hardware. It takes a lot of time to, lug this stuff around. And so that's when I decided maybe we needed a place to house all this. And by the way, this is I think one of the best pieces of software to introduce people the first time they ever try VR. It's called First Contact by Oculus, and it helps you get comfortable with the technology in a very kind of low stakes, friendly environment. So anyway, as I mentioned, it was getting hard moving all this stuff around, so I decided we need to have a lab, some central place where we could house all of this technology. And so my colleagues and I looked around and found an empty room in a new science building. It wasn't designed originally for VR, but it was empty. That was a main kind of component. And so we had to promote it. So I created some posters for an open house. And just in terms of technology, I'm not a graphic designer, but I use Canva, which is a great free tool for designing little things like that. And ironically, getting back to Guy Kawasaki, he is now the head evangelist for Canva. He doesn't work at Apple anymore. So anyway, I created these, and I put them in like every faculty, lounge for different departments to try to promote it. And so here's the lab. My colleague Kent, who also helped a lot in this process. And you can see over in the left corner, there's a kind of a light stand. This woman is using the HTC Vive. So not only were I doing open houses for faculty who came, but also for students, and they really got excited about trying it out. If you look over the shoulder of this woman here with the headset on, you can see there's another person doing, so we had like 2 stations in this room for VR. And this is what, the people in the room, if you're not in the headset, they could see on this monitor what was happening inside the VR. So it kind of gets them prepared for what they're going to experience. So now I want to look at some different categories of VR, and these came out of a book which I highly recommend called Experience on Demand, written by Jeremy Bailenson, who runs the VR lab at Stanford. And he's done a lot of interesting research on VR. And the book is divided, each chapter kind of highlights a different type of VR. So I'm not going to look at all, I think there are like 10 chapters, but here are some of the categories. He's got this concept of worldview, so allowing the VR to put you in a place. One example was you're inside sort of a space capsule, and you get to look around and see a totally different worldview. I'm going to show you in terms of biology, being able to get inside the human body as a different kind of worldview that VR allows. Then there's his notion of walking in the shoes of another. That's really powerful in terms of building empathy. There are lots of great VR experiences where you can really get a sense of what it feels like to be someone in a different situation. And we'll see actually how that concept matches up to our use of VR in our interior architecture program. Then this concept of reverse field trips, meaning taking you somewhere in the world, or somewhere maybe perhaps back in history. I'll show you an example of our education department has students who are practicing to become teachers, and they get to take a reverse field trip into a simulated classroom. Practice made perfect. So this is actually the first chapter of the book where Bailenson looks at the use of VR among professional athletes. NFL quarterbacks, for years they watched film, a flat film, and now a lot of them do their game day training in VR, where they can see a 360 view of what's coming at them. And you'll see how one of our athletics teams is now using VR for their practice. And then finally, remembering that it's not just about, these first four categories are you're a consumer of the VR content, but it's really powerful to start thinking about building your own VR content. And that's a really exciting thing happening here at Endicott. The communications department now has a new course where students are building VR content, and I'll share some of the things that they're doing. So let's look at these examples. One thing to realize, I would say in the workplace in general, two of the biggest industries that are actively using VR are healthcare and architecture. And it just so happens that we at Endicott have a School of Nursing, and we have a really good interior architecture program. So those were natural places to start. So we have a course called Pathophysiology, and it tends to be nursing students, some students in athletic training and sports science, and they're using a tool called ShareCare VR. And as you maybe get a sense here, this student is inside, I think that looks like the heart from my memory, and it allows you to, pick a certain part of the body to look at and then turn layers on and off, go in, look around. And so the way it worked, faculty member Joyce Shaw decided to use ShareCare as a way to supplement her class. So every Friday she had a lab. And so the VR lab happened to be in the same building. So students, some of them were doing their hands-on lab, and then in groups of 4, they would come up to the VR lab and in pairs. So 2 would be on one VR station, 2 on another one. And she would every week say, okay, today you're going to look at these organs. It might be the kidney and the pancreas, and I want you to look out for this or that. And they would kind of cycle through, and each pair would be up there for about 10 minutes. And then the next pair would come up, and we just rotate the students through that way. So here's a short clip to give you an idea of how the ShareCare experience works. So here's a quote from a student in the evaluation of the course. I love the VR lab work. It helped put what we were learning into a human body perspective. It was very helpful to see the topic we are learning in a much more up-close and hands-on way. And here's a quote from the professor, Dr. Joyce Shaw, who's been teaching for over 20 years. From a teaching perspective, those experience engaged and motivated students in ways I have not seen before. So she's very happy with it and plans to continue using it in her class. So now let's switch to interior architecture and see how they used VR. So they already have experience using technology a lot. They're using a program called Revit. Sometimes they use SketchUp, and they can design things on the computer which they can move their mouse around and get some sense of the 3D view. But there's a free tool called Enscape, which is a plugin which allows you to take a Revit file and export it so that it can be viewed in an Oculus headset. This is an example of a student, and what the teacher did is they had the students actually present their final projects to the whole class. So the student would literally be doing a walkthrough. They could walk, and the rest of the class would see on the big screen what they were showing. They would go downstairs and behind walls and stuff. And one of the powerful things was they got to get a sense of the height and the distance between things, they said, in ways that were much more powerful than just seeing it on a flat screen. So let's take a look at one of the student tours.
This is a bed. What's that material on the wall?
It's what the wall covering?
Yeah.
It's a wall covering for Noel.
Oh.
Or I think Noel.
Like a vinyl? Or something.
That's the ambulance entry.
Yeah, you can physically walk, or you can use the thing your left thumb will allow you to walk also. Depending on how you might want to just use that. Yeah.
And then there's the private rooms have doors.
So we asked some students to reflect on their experiences in VR.
Beginning phases when you're like planning out and space planning, you could say, oh, like let me go in and see how much space this actually is. Like, like you're saying, you're like it's so big.
Yeah.
And then realize like you pull a view and like it's so skewed, like you don't really know until you're in it, and then you're like, whoa, it's a lot of space.
Yeah. Particularly those tall spaces, like the atrium spaces. Carrie had the glass thing that we like went inside. It's kind of interesting. It's like whoa. You know?
Yeah, but I think it's cool for presentations too. Like I feel like for clients, like that would be a really cool thing to be like, oh, put on the goggles, let's walk through, and be like, oh, let's change that, and you can like take notes.
Go ahead.
I feel like it was a good experience because more firms, like in the real world, like workforce are starting to use VR. So it was good to like try it out in the classroom. So like you get to work one day. It's not, I mean, it'd be fine if you had never done it before, but like this was cool to like get introduced to it.
So here's a quote from the professor who was in that class. Pre-exploring the user experience, it places a real emphasis on the clearance and heights in the drawings, brings attention to the wayfinding in their design much more than just a floor plan. So it's continued to be used ever since then in interior architecture. So here's another kind of VR, and it's a program called Immersion, and it actually doesn't require a headset, but you are actually having a live experience with these students, and there is a person, they happen to be based in California. While you're doing it, they're actors who are voicing out the different students. So whatever you say to them, they will react in real time, and sometimes they'll kind of put their head down and fall asleep, or they'll pick up their cell phone. They'll act in ways that middle school students act, and you get some practice teaching. And this gives you a better idea of kind of what it looks like. So it's amazing how emotionally invested people get. Like the students would get very nervous, like, oh my God, I have to go and do it. And then the other students can observe, and then they have a reflection after, say, a 10-minute simulation. Like, I really like what you did here. I noticed something here. And that's one of the great things about VR in general. It's the sense of you can all talk all you want about classroom management, but you got to experience it. And this immediate experience, that's how you learn. You make a few mistakes, you do it again. And immersion, we used it in education. They also have simulations for hospitality and retail and things like that. So we've been really happy with immersion, and they're great to work with as well. So I mentioned earlier that the idea of creation of VR. So a guy named John Donovan created a new course called Next Generation Storytelling. Storytelling using virtual and augmented reality. So one of the types of content that they created was with 360 cameras. This was actually a project they worked, and actually it was a sort of real life project. We were up near Gloucester. There's a place called the Cape Ann Museum, which the students are actually in this photo. And they were creating a interactive 360 VR experience, which now, ironically, during the pandemic, Cape Ann Museum is finding to be very useful. So it was a real world project where students had to kind of plan ahead of time, work in teams. They each were responsible for different rooms, and they were using different tools. I'll show you one tool. This is actually at the end of the course. The professor used, there's a tool called ThingLink VR, which allowed, anybody who wanted to see the different projects just by clicking on the different students. You can't tell, but you could move your mouse around. And that's another thing to point out about VR. While it's mainly thought of as being in a headset, there is such a thing as sort of web VR, where you're just moving your mouse and you can see 360. So every time you clicked on a different student, it would open up their project. So they used ThingLink, they used 360 video and a variety of tools. And that course is now a permanent part of the curriculum here at Endicott. And then the final curriculum integration is in athletics. So one of the visits I made to a different department was I went to the athletics department monthly meeting, and I showed a variety of different, I showed them a boxing simulation, a baseball simulation, and there were some brave people who tried it out. And literally before, I couldn't even leave the room, and the lacrosse coach tracked down some of her students, some of her players in the gym and said, oh, you got to come here and try this. And so they were actually already using it that same day. And there's a simulation called, or I shouldn't say simulation, in the VR world they call it an experience, a VR experience called Goaltender, which is kind of designed for hockey, but you notice you can change from a puck to a ball. And so it made total sense for a lacrosse goalie. They had interesting little activities like, they'll change the color of the ball, and if it's red, you use your left hand, and if it's blue, you use your right hand. And you can compare your score. It has a video game kind of feel, but they're getting a really good workout. And Maureen Spellman, she's great. She's got a lot of enthusiasm. So she talks about using it for hand speed and cognitive training. The idea of you're not just training your body, but you're training your brain to kind of make quick decisions the more and more you try the simulation. Now here's one that has not been actually integrated, but I used to be a history teacher, and this is actually my favorite VR experience, which I think would be great in a history class, called 1943 Berlin Blitz. And what's amazing about it is they have the original audio of a BBC reporter who went up in a plane on a bombing raid. And so you have that original audio, and they built a VR experience around it, and you are inside the plane. You've got the actual pilot and co-pilot, and you can look around 360, and all of the things they're experiencing match up with the sound of the original video. And one of the things, you just learn things in a new way. For example, when they're flying over the coast of Europe, you see all these spotlights come up. And I thought, that's odd. It turns out at that time in the war, the Germans did not have radar yet. So the only way they could kind of see planes as they were coming was from these spotlights. And so as the plane goes through, they weave their way through the spotlights. You feel the flak. You actually get this visceral feel like, oh my God, we're going to get shot down. It's very powerful. So, I'm showing these different examples, but I just thought it would be helpful to take a step back and think about, well, VR is it just a new trend? What's the actual learning advantage? And you guys have probably seen this famous, cone of learning from Edgar Dale, and the idea that we, read and hear, we just remember some of it, but the idea of simulating the real experience and doing the real thing, that helps us retain 90%. And that's what VR is all about. You're experiencing something. And studies show that's how people learn more effectively. And there's also this idea of, it's a new term I learned called embodied cognition. So we tend to think of it's all about, what your brain is experiencing. That's how you learn. But when you do VR, you can be wearing things on your hand that actually give haptic feedback. In other words, your hand vibrates. You're learning how to detect someone's pulse. I've tried this in a VR experience, and I put my hand over, and suddenly I felt this thump thump in my hand, and so it was like my whole body was involved in the experience, and that's I think that's only going to grow. In the haptic, you can have haptic suits where you're moving your legs, and that's adjusting something in the experience. So it's it can be a real full body experience. So I just want to give an overview of some of the hardware that we used. and the sort of pros and cons. So the Oculus Go is one of the things we started with. I think it was like $199. You'll notice it has just a single hand controller, so that you can do seated experiences with that. The Rift, you're connected to your computer, so that's got a limitation. But the Oculus Quest is kind of the state of the art now. It's totally hands-free in terms of, sorry, I shouldn't say hands-free because you're using the controls. You're not tethered to the computer, so you can move around much more freely. And they just came out with a Quest 2. We also have an HTC Vive. One of the big differences with that is they have these kind of what look like these trackers that sit way up high. They can be on stands, or you can kind of attach them to different parts of the room. Whereas with the old Rift, it's more of a sensor that sits right on the table. One of the things we learned also is that in order to use these VR systems with the computer, you've got to have a computer with a high-end gaming graphics card. So the average laptop that you might be using on campus likely won't really work with VR, so you have to invest in a little bit more powerful graphics card to make it work. And then at the lower end, if you really want to get started quickly, Google Cardboard is simply putting your phone into this piece of cardboard, and you can have a VR experience. And we showed this to School of Education again. There's a great collection of VR experiences called Google Expeditions. And you can build these kind of virtual field trips, have students go to places like Mount Everest and explore different parts of that experience. So just wanted to share some of the things that we're hoping to do in the future and in looking at the industry overall. So this is a product, SimX, that we've tried. It's amazing. This is one actually about working with somebody who may have COVID. And I tried it, and one of the interesting things, the first thing is I thought, oh, I have to go through the door and look at the patient. And I kept not being able to do it. And eventually I realized through trial and error that this little cabinet on the side was full of PPE. So I would have to put on my face shield and my gloves and various things before the door would even open. Oh, I had to squirt the hand sanitizer. It was very realistic. What's also interesting about this one, you can have two people in the headset, in different headsets interacting, and then the teacher can, if you like talk to the patient, you ask them a question, the teacher is on a computer and they can click a button and have the patient respond with different responses. So this is AltSpace VR, which is a social VR experience and something that I've tried out. In fact, some conferences are now being run this way, and you get an avatar and you really get the sense of you're in the room with other people. People can make presentations, and then as you move your avatar close to somebody and talk, you can hear them, and it really feels like a live kind of conversation. You've got different gestures you can make. And so some schools are actually having classes in this setting. Of course, the challenge is all the students would need to have the headset, which isn't very realistic right now. But I could imagine a scenario where you might have, say, 20 headsets that rotate through different classes. And if people are, needing to be quarantined, they could attend class this way. So that's a new technology that's been growing its use during the pandemic. So this has been around for a while, this VR experience called Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes. It's a great name, but what is really interesting about it is how it kind of deals with this issue that I just mentioned about, sort of lack of headsets. So in this game, but it's a problem-solving game, there's one person in the headset, and then the other people are helping that person literally defuse a bomb. But the key thing is they have information that the person in the headset doesn't have. So they have to communicate that information in enough time. So this is a good way of thinking about what other kind of VR experiences could be designed that everybody gets involved in the experience, even if they're not inside the headset. So another big use of VR is in workforce training. People who are learning to build jet engines or do car repair or things like that. In fact, this company Transfer VR just raised $12 million, so there's clearly a market for it. And they are actually doing some work with community colleges. So students who are studying a very specific, skill and trade that can be practiced in VR is it's much more affordable than having to have all the expensive tools for every kind of workforce training. So, considering our current situation in the United States, this is an important way to think about VR, and that is using it for empathy or change. There's a great VR documentary called Traveling While Black, where you get the experience of what it was like in the 1950s if you were traveling around the United States and where the safe places were and how you knew about that and things of that nature. So, area of VR that I think will continue to grow. And then finally, we plan to purchase a Microsoft HoloLens. So this is not virtual reality, it's mixed reality. So in this scenario, you can actually see through your glasses, but you have this layer on top of what you're seeing that seems real, and you can manipulate it. In this case, it's a human anatomy kind of exercise. I think this area is going to grow. In fact, Jeremy Balanson, when he talks about the future of VR, he thinks the big headsets will be gone, and a lot of this you'll be able to have these kinds of experiences, mixing some of the real world on top of some of the augmented reality on top of the real world. So that's my presentation, and I would love to hear from you. I know we have this Pronto app that can be used for communication. If you have any questions, please share them with me. I'd also love to hear about what you're doing. If you're using VR already at your school, what challenges you may have faced, what some successes you've had. I think these are early days, and we can all learn from each other. I don't pretend to have all the answers. These are just 5 specific things that I've tried. And again, thanks to my colleagues in academic tech, Kent Barkley and Elvis Glavas, who've been great supporters in this whole venture. And I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks.